Welcome to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski. How many of us dream about a life that we want to lead, but are afraid of stepping away from our comfort zone? Now, let's face it, it's easier to lose yourself in a new television series than it is to get intentional about creating that life that you've always wanted to lead. Today, I'm speaking with Julie Littlechild, who's the founder and CEO of Absolute Engagement. Julie will share with us what she found out after researching the topic and living it. Thank you so much for being here, Julie.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited.
I know, I am too. And you know what? I've known you for a really long time, and we've had so many different conversations, but we've never had this one before.
I know.
So let's just delve right in. Your story is about getting intentional, about creating that life that you've always wanted. But the work that you did on the subject really didn't start there, did it? I just would like you to start from the beginning and just tell us, what started you on this journey?
It didn't really start there, you're right, because it's almost like a story within a story. Personally, I was at a point in my life where I had sold a business, not like a life-changing sale. I was still working, but I'd gone through this transition in my life. And because I'd always been such a busy person, my inclination was just to go straight to it. I'm going to get right to the next thing. I'm going to work. And I found myself pausing for a moment and knowing that something just wasn't sitting right with me. I was not on a path that I understood or was sure I wanted to be on. But what I had observed in the people that I worked with professionally is that there were a group of them, they're all entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And there was a group of them who were incredibly successful, but who seemed more joyful than everybody else. They were a bit lighter, a bit more free in a way. And I knew I wanted that. Now I'm a researcher,
who doesn't?
Right? I mean, it's such a compelling thing. But as a researcher, I thought, I'm going to actually do a study on what's different about these people. And that was really what led me down this path.
So you did this research, you did the study. What did you learn? What did you learn about the people that you identified as absolutely engaged?
Well, I mean, the first thing I found is that almost everybody hit some kind of fork in the road, right? And it was usually, I always think of it that our lives, or our business lives at least, have these two axes of growth and success, but then fulfillment.
And so do personal lives as well.
They absolutely do. No, you're right. And often you get to this point where either they keep going together or they diverge. Right. And that's what I found was this moment almost. So almost everyone hit that fork. It was largely because they had drifted somehow from what was important to them or what they wanted to achieve. But then some managed to break through. And that was what I was really interested in, is like, how did you get past that? How did you get back on track?
And how did they?
Well, I mean, to some extent, everyone was a little different. Everybody's story is different, of course. We're all trying to get to different things. But I did observe a fairly common approach and framework. And to some extent, it depended on why you had drifted, right? There's a theory called the 1 degree effect, which I think affects so many of us. And it's the idea that we get off track, not because we've made any specific decisions or intentional decisions. We just sort of drift slowly because family gets in the way or work gets in the way. And the 1 degree effect is this idea that if a plane flew across the country and just went 1 degree off course, instead of trying to get to Charlotte, they'd end up in Connecticut somewhere. And that's what we do in our lives.
Right. So you were studying a specific profession because I know it was entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that the lessons hold for everyone that don't, like people who don't even run their own businesses?
Yeah, I do. And at first it was very much about that industry that I was looking at. But what came out of it, and what I was so happy about what came out of it, is that this approach and this framework of transformation, if you will, felt very consistent. Whether you were trying to start a business or whether you were just trying to improve some part of your life, it felt that there was a well-worn path that you could take.
Interesting. So how do you think that these lessons apply to women who are actually thinking about their future right now?
Well, it's an interesting case with women, I think, because I can't generalize, but I am one. So
me too.
Let's do that. But what what I really think is that, there's a path and we can think about the future and get what we want, but there are certain obstacles that I find, I don't know if you see this, but I find it very common with women.
Wait, Julie, let me just stop you right here. Let's talk about the obstacles.
Yeah.
We will be right back in a few minutes and we'll discuss the obstacles with Julie. Don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski. We're discussing getting intentional about creating the life you've always wanted to lead. Now, before we went to break, I had asked you about women and the lessons learned. So what obstacles do women have?
There's so many obstacles, usually between our ears, I think, that we that we face. And what I've observed, and certainly what I heard back, was that there were a few that really got in the way. And when I say got in the way, I mean of allowing ourselves to think about moving to something different or moving to something better. It wasn't even that the obstacles were in achieving it. It was taking that first step sometimes. And to some extent, we saw things like trying opened up the possibility of failure, right? And we all deal with that.
So
right?
Julie, let me just ask you a question, because during COVID lockdown, I spoke to a lot of young university females. Yeah. And they all struggled with making a decision. Yeah. They were all so afraid of making a decision. Did you find anything in your research about decision making and risk? Because those are the two things that impede women the most.
I do think so, and for very different reasons. I mean, sometimes we perceive risk. Well, first of all, I would say stress itself stops us from making decisions.
True.
So it doesn't surprise me that during COVID, a lot of people were impacted by that. But I think that the way we set up our own role, either in our own heads or because we've been told, can get in the way of this. So we often feel like we carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, that if I just move off course for a minute, everything around me is just somehow going to fail. But as long as I never articulate that I want something different, I can't actually fail it. So it feels like there's these competing issues that we've got. And the other thing I might say is that sometimes when we feel that everybody relies on us, we kind of like it. Like there's also a personal issue.
There's an addictive part to it.
So I think we have to get very honest with ourselves. And that was one of the hallmarks of people who transformed, was that they were incredibly honest at the outset.
And I think that's really important, especially if any of us want to make a change in our lives. We need to be extremely honest, not with, if I was to make a change, do I have to be extremely honest with you? I need to be extremely honest with myself.
That's it, yeah.
So if we're looking at honesty, what's the framework? What were the steps that you identified on the path to absolute engagement for these people?
Well, and the first step is really it's a reflection of what you were just saying, and it's awareness. So the steps themselves were awareness, audacity, action, accountability, and renewal. Mm-hmm. And I find a framework really helpful, just because we like to jump midway to a process, right? We like to start thinking about all the reasons it won't work. And having any kind of framework, I think, just grounds us in this path and this approach. So those were the 5 steps that we saw that were really quite consistent.
So I want to go through all the 5 steps with you, but I think one of the other things that we need to look at when you look at the framework, patience.
Oh, yes.
Because I think this is something that everyone has lost in their lives right now, and everyone wants everything right now, 5 minutes ago, and nobody wants to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, and I would also argue it's patience broadly, but being patient with ourselves and giving ourselves a break, because this path is not consistent. Everything is not going to be perfect. So having that ability to give ourselves a break and be patient with making some mistakes, that's critical to this process.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because everybody, it doesn't matter who it is you talk to, have you finished this? Well, no, it's not perfect yet.
Right.
A lot of people are looking for that perfection.
Yeah.
The problem is it's a moving scale, and you'll never get to perfection because there's no such thing.
Absolutely. I think that's probably the number one thing I've seen hold people back, is this perfectionism trap. And that's what it is.
And I think one of the other things, like when we come back from break, I want to talk to you about the steps and go in depth with all of them. But before we go, I want to talk about the fact that, We do have a lot of negativity in our brains,
Mhm.
and we do put ourselves down on a regular basis.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure whether your research came up with anything that could be helpful, but we do have that imposter syndrome. Do you have any suggestions for anyone that, I've had it. I'm sure
Yeah,
you've gone through it
absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think the suggestions are really just about being aware that this is happening, because the downfall is if we're not. So
Right.
this idea that I should be this person, I should be doing something, self-editing, self-doubt, just have to ground ourselves in what's going on, and then we can move forward.
That is great. So when we come back, we'll talk about all the steps to help us be aware. Welcome back to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski, where we're discussing getting intentional about creating the life that we've always wanted to lead. So, Julie, let's begin with the steps. Awareness.
Awareness. Awareness is a step of just letting yourself dream and think about what energizes and inspires you. And what we found, by the way, with this process is after each step, there's a path. It's either I'm going to do something about this, or I'm just going to go back to my comfort zone. And so I think the key with awareness is just being able to say without making a decision, because that's what we do.
Mhm.
We start to dream, well, that can't really work, right? There's got to be, and we start self-editing. We start thinking of all of those reasons why it can't. So awareness is just letting ourselves think about what's really important, what energizes us, what gives us inspiration. And I don't even have to know at this point how that's going to manifest as a goal. It's just giving myself time to do that. However that it happens in your life. Go for a walk, dream, talk to a friend, whatever that is.
Amazing. Now, what about audacity, which is the second step?
Yeah, so audacity is really, each one takes it a little closer to something concrete. So awareness, we like to say that's where possibility lives, because frankly, anything is possible. Audacity is really, it requires a bit more courage, because now what we're doing is saying, okay, knowing what I know now about what I want to achieve. And again, that could be something big, or it could be something small. It could be a different role at work. It could be a different job altogether. It could be taking the trip of a lifetime. It could be any of those things. Audacity is now about saying, well, what's the specific goal that I have? Based on that awareness, what am I going to do? And trying to narrow it down. Still don't have to figure out how I'm going to do it, but need to have the courage to draw a line in the sand almost and say, this is what I want. And that's very hard for some people to do. And that's really what an audacious goal is all about.
Right. Okay. So the third step is action. So tell us about action.
Well, now it gets real. Right. So if audacity is about what you're going to do, then action is about how you're going to do it. And it's such a critical step. So we like to say that this is sort of where confidence lives, because now we've got to actually put one foot in front of the other. So we take that goal and we begin to break it down into actions. Do I need to get different training? Do I need to talk to somebody significant in my life because this will be a big change? What are all of those steps that I need to take? And now it becomes very concrete and a timeline, but again, the idea is that we don't jump to that right away. We've got to give ourselves the space to get to that point.
And I think it's very important that you just said, we need to give ourselves some space.
Yeah.
It's that patience thing again. Because everybody wants something now. They want the changes now. They want the future now. And I think it's what you've been saying is extremely important, because these changes take a lot of steps and a lot of time.
They do. I mean, this, and let's face it, this is a lifetime. There isn't one path. It's really a path that leads to another path that leads to another path, right? Because we're always evolving. And in fairness, what is important to us changes along the way. Yeah. So we may need to pivot. We learned a lot about pivots during COVID.
Right.
And that's sometimes required.
Okay, so now we're on to accountability.
Yeah.
This is the next step.
Yep. So accountability is really about thinking through a structured plan to hold yourself accountable and to find the support that you need to hold yourself accountable. We have a lot of dreams in our head that never get action because we haven't articulated it to anyone else in our lives. And there were a few things. I found a lot of people who were really successful with this either had a mastermind group that they were part of, or just a group of colleagues, or a spouse that they talked to. But there was some structure and some consistency to that. And one of the most interesting things we learned is called the Michelangelo effect. And it really is about choosing who you talk to very carefully, because we are so formed by the responses of others. So if we're excited about something and we go home and say, this is what I want to do, and our spouse says, well, I guess I'm taking care of the kids then. Like, if we don't get the response, that can actually negatively impact your chances of success. So choose carefully.
Choose carefully. And when we come back, we will be talking to Julie about the final point and the final one that'll get you to your absolute engagement for your future. And listen carefully to what she says, because we all need a little bit of a break. So when we come back, we'll talk a bit more about absolute engagement. Welcome back to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski, where we're discussing getting intentional about creating the life that we've always wanted to lead. And with me is Julie Littlechild, founder and CEO of Absolute Engagement. Julie, we are now at the final point.
Final one. We're there.
Renewal
Yes.
at last. So
Yes.
What is a renewal?
Well, I mean, I'd take it back to a couple of your comments about patience and whatnot, because renewal is just the very human part of this. It's about ensuring that we're feeding our energy and creativity. Again, that's where we say this is where creativity lives. Without it, nothing else matters, and we tend not to accomplish our goals. I think what we found in the research is that those who had transformed were very intentional about this phase. They didn't just leave it to happenstance. They made sure that, in fact, it did happen. So whether that's time off, whether it's sleep, whether it's exercise, whatever that is that gives you the time and the space, we've got to have that as part of our plan.
So what can get in our way?
Gosh, and again, I think this may be, there's some female characteristics that come to mind for me now. And I can't say that's exclusive, but I certainly know I see it in myself and my friends. One is that we think it's selfish somehow, right? I have to take time for myself. Are you kidding me? I'm keeping everybody going here. So it can feel selfish. And even if that is a lurking concern, when we say something out loud, it loses its power. But when we keep that in, it can get in the way.
Right.
So I do think that gets in the way. And maybe as a result of that, we forget that we matter in this process as well. And and a little self-love and a little self-care goes a long way. But I think that in order to do this, we have to be willing to get off that treadmill for a few minutes, find the off switch, and give ourselves time, because ultimately all of the transformation that we're talking about will be better as a result of doing it. We know that.
But this is an exhausting process.
Yes.
So what can drive us forward? What do we need to get us to that next level?
I've done a ton of reading personally about these kinds of things, and it's so different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But what we need broadly is grit, right? So I encourage people to look at authors like Angela Duckworth on this concept of grit, because the idea is that we can create it. We have grit in other parts of our lives that we don't always apply to ourselves and our own goals. And so I think that that's really what this is about. And it's about mindset, right? I love the work that Carol Dweck did on growth mindset. And there's a lot of parallels with kids here as well. But this idea that if I fail at something, it's a comment on me, it's a failure. Whereas growth mindset is much more about, I didn't do well this time, but that's just part of the process. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've got to train our own minds in a way to handle this.
And I think you're right. I think as women, we're very hard on ourselves. And it's like, why am I not here? And why haven't I accomplished this? And, the problem is we keep putting ourselves up against, extremely successful people that have had different situations than we've come from or that we've been through.
Yeah.
So, was it smooth sailing for you after you, had done all your research and you knew all the background information?
Absolutely. Birds flying, rainbows, there was unicorns. It was perfect. You wouldn't believe.
Amazing.
Of course not. No, and that's where I see the wave of progress, right? It's never a straight line.
Right.
So this allowed me to get to the next phase of my life professionally. And then I would occasionally have to step back and try again, because again, my values might shift, my needs might shift, the needs of my family might shift. So it keeps taking me back. But again, what I love about these steps is it gives me a process to go back to. Instead of just throwing my hands up and saying it's all over, I have a process.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you.
Now, if you're intentional about creating the life that you want to lead, Julie's research demonstrates that there are 5 steps to get you on the path of absolute engagement. Step 1 is awareness, which is where possibility lives. Step 2 is audacity, where courage lives. Step 3 is action, where confidence lives. Step 4 is accountability, where commitment lives. And finally, step 5 is renewal, where your creativity lives. Good luck. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm trying to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Bye for now.